My mother and father left for a trip to Paris on my wedding day, leaving me a gift. When I opened it, my eyes widened. It was my burned wedding suit, along with a letter that read, "Let's see how you get married." They didn't know my father-in-law and mother-in-law. So, when I posted photos with my in-laws, the Smiths, billionaires, my parents got furious. 1,000 calls bombarded me. The smell hit me first. Acrid. Chemical. Like something precious had been set on fire and left to rot. I'm standing in my childhood bedroom at 11:47 p.m. on what should have been the happiest day of my life, holding a charred piece of fabric that used to be my wedding suit. The one I'd saved 3 months' salary to buy. The one I'd worn for exactly 47 minutes before everything went to hell. Let me back up. Let me tell you how a wedding gift can destroy everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and the people who made you. This morning, I was David Chen, 28, about to marry the woman of my dreams. Sarah Mackenzie, no, Sarah Smith, had been my everything for 2 years. Smart, funny, with this way of laughing that made me forget every stupid thing I'd ever worried about. Her father, Robert Smith, owned half the commercial real estate in the city. Her mother, Catherine, ran 3 art galleries and spoke 4 languages fluently. They were billionaires. Actual, real-life billionaires. And somehow, miraculously, they liked me. David, Robert had said 6 months ago, gripping my shoulder with hands that had signed contracts worth more than some country's GDP, "You make our daughter happy. That makes you family." My parents should have been there to see it. Should have seen me walking down that aisle in my perfect suit, should have watched Sarah's face when I promised to love her forever, should have been there when Robert stood up during the reception and announced he was bringing me into the family business as a partner, not an employee, a partner. Instead, they'd left for Paris 3 days ago. "We have to go, honey," my mother had said over the phone, her voice carrying that particular strain of fake sweetness that meant she was lying. "Your father's work emergency. You understand?" I didn't understand. Who the heck has a work emergency that requires flying to Paris during their only son's wedding? My father managed a small accounting firm. The most international thing he'd ever done was help Mrs. Patterson with her Canadian tax situation. But I'd been too happy, too busy, too in love to push. I'd figured they were nervous about meeting Sarah's parents. My family wasn't poor, exactly, but we weren't Smith money. We were clip coupons and save for vacation money. We were buy generic cereal and name brand dreams money. So I'd let them go. I'd walk down that aisle without them, danced my first dance as a married man while they were somewhere over the Atlantic, probably sipping champagne and complaining about airline food. The wedding was perfect anyway. Sarah was radiant in her grandmother's vintage dress. Robert cried during his speech. Catherine kissed my cheek and whispered, "Welcome to the family, sweetheart." For 8 hours, I was the luckiest man alive. Then I came home to change before Sarah and I left for our honeymoon in Tuscany, and I found the package. It was sitting on my bed like a tumor. Plain brown box, no return address, just my name written in my mother's careful cursive, David Chen Smith. Even the hyphen looked angry. My hand shook as I opened it. Maybe it was guilt, some last-minute wedding gift to make up for missing the ceremony. Maybe it was something sentimental, something that would explain why they'd chosen the other side of the world over their son's wedding day. The smell escaped first, that bitter smoke and chemical reek that made my eyes water. Then I saw it. My wedding suit. The beautiful, perfect, stupidly expensive suit I'd worn this morning. It was burned. Not just singed, burned. Someone had doused it in something flammable and lit it up. The jacket was mostly gone, just blackened scraps clinging to melted buttons. The pants were better preserved but still charred beyond recognition. Underneath the ruins of my suit was a letter, written in my father's blocky handwriting. "Let's see how you get married." That was it. 6 words. No signature, no explanation, no love or congratulations or apology for missing the most important day of my life. Just a threat, delivered with the ashes of my wedding clothes. I stared at that letter for probably 10 minutes, reading those 6 words over and over until they stopped making sense. My brain kept trying to find another interpretation, some way this could be a joke or a misunderstanding or anything other than what it obviously was. My parents had burned my wedding suit. My parents had threatened my marriage. My parents, who'd raised me to believe that family came first, that loyalty mattered more than money, that love was the only thing that truly counted in this world, my parents had declared war on my happiness. The worst part? I had no idea why. My phone started ringing at 11:52 p.m. Mom. Dad. Mom again. Dad again. Unknown number that turned out to be my cousin Jenny. My Aunt Marie. Mom. Dad. Mom. Dad. Mom, 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 dad, mom, dad. By midnight, I had 47 missed calls and a voicemail box full of rage. I listened to the first one with the suit still clenched in my fists, that burnt smell filling my nostrils like a warning. "David." My mother's voice, tight and furious. "We saw the pictures. We saw what you did. How dare you post those photos with them before calling us? How dare you let us find out from Facebook that you've sold yourself? Call me back. Now." The second voicemail was my father. "Those people are not your family. We are your family. Whatever they're paying you, whatever they promised you, it's not worth it. Come home, son. We need to talk." The third was my mother again, crying this time. "We raised you better than this, David. We raised you to have dignity, to have pride. Not to marry for money. Not to throw away everything we taught you for a woman who doesn't really love you. I deleted the rest without listening. The photos. They were talking about the photos. Sarah and I had posted maybe a dozen pictures from the wedding on social media. Normal stuff, us kissing at the altar, the first dance, cutting the cake. But there were also pictures of us with her parents. Robert with his arm around my shoulders, grinning like he'd just gained a son instead of lost a daughter. Catherine kissing my cheek while Sarah laughed in the background. The four of us at the head table, looking like we'd known each other forever instead of just 2 years. Looking like a real family. I understood now. My parents hadn't known who Sarah really was. Somehow, incredibly, I'd been dating and engaged to Sarah Smith, daughter of billionaire Robert Smith, for 2 years, and my parents had no idea they were about to gain one of the wealthiest families in the state as in-laws. I'd never told them Sarah's last name was Smith because, honestly, it had never seemed important. She was just Sarah to me. The woman who made terrible jokes and loved old movies and cried during dog food commercials. The fact that her father could buy a small country with his pocket change was just background noise. But my parents had seen those wedding photos, had seen the venue, the designer dress, the 5-tier cake, the string quartet, and they'd put it together. Sarah Mackenzie wasn't just some girl their son was marrying. She was Sarah Smith. And they were furious that I hadn't told them. Furious enough to burn my wedding suit. Furious enough to threaten my marriage. Furious enough to try to destroy the happiest day of my life from 3,000 miles away. Sarah found me at 1 a.m., sitting on our hotel room floor with my laptop open and my phone buzzing endlessly beside me. David? Baby, what's wrong? She was still in her reception dress, this gorgeous silver thing that made her look like she was made of starlight. Her makeup was a little smudged, her hair coming loose from its elaborate updo, and she was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And I was about to tell her that my parents hated her. My parents know who you are now, I said without looking up from the screen. I've been reading about the Smith family business empire for an hour, trying to understand what my parents saw when they looked at the wedding photos. They saw our pictures. They figured it out. Sarah kicked off her heels and sank down beside me. Figured what out? That you're rich. That your family is. I gestured vaguely at my laptop screen, which was showing an article about Robert Smith's latest acquisition. This level of rich. She was quiet for a moment. Then, and they're upset about that? I showed her the burned suit on the bed. Watched her face go white. Oh my gosh, David. Did they burn that? Wedding present, I said. Along with a note that said let's see how you get married. Sarah stared at the charred fabric like it might bite her. That's psychotic. Who burned someone's wedding suit? What kind of person does that? My parents, apparently. The people who'd taught me to ride a bike and helped with my homework and celebrated every small victory in my unremarkable life. The people I'd trusted completely until 12 hours ago. They think I married you for money, I said. They think I'm some kind of gold digger who sold himself for a chance at the Smith fortune. But that's insane. You didn't even know I was rich when we met. She was right. We'd met at a bookstore, she was reading in the philosophy section, completely absorbed in some dense tome about existentialism. I'd made a joke about Sartre being terrible at parties, she'd laughed, and we'd talked for 3 hours over increasingly cold coffee. She'd paid for the drinks, but so what? Lots of women paid for drinks. It hadn't meant anything except that she was generous. I hadn't learned about the Smith family money until our 4th date, when she'd casually mentioned that her father did some real estate stuff. Even then, I'd assumed he was maybe a successful realtor, not a man who owned half the commercial buildings in 3 states. They don't know that, I said. They just see the wedding photos, see your parents, see the money, and assume I've been playing some long game. Sarah's phone buzzed. Then again. Who's texting you at 1 a.m.? I asked. She looked at the screen and frowned. Unknown number. She read the message aloud. Tell your husband his family wants to talk to him. He can't hide behind you forever. Another buzz. We know what kind of woman you really are. Another. Gold diggers raise gold diggers. My stomach dropped. They're texting you? How did they get your number? I don't know. Sarah's voice was small, scared. David, this is harassment. My phone rang. Mom again. I answered without thinking. David, thank God. Listen to me. You texted my wife, I said. You're sending threatening messages to my wife. She's not your wife if the marriage isn't real. My mother's voice was sharp, desperate. And how can it be real when it's built on lies? What lies, Mom? What the heck are you talking about? You didn't tell us who she was. You let us think she was just some normal girl, not the daughter of. She is just some normal girl. The words came out louder than I'd intended. Sarah flinched beside me. She's the woman I love. The woman I've loved for 2 years. The fact that her father has money doesn't change that. Everything changes that, my mother said. Everything. Do you think she would have looked at you twice if you weren't useful to her family? Do you think they would have welcomed you so warmly if they didn't see something they could use? Use for what? I don't know yet. But people like that don't just give people like us their daughters, David. There's always a price. There's always a catch. I looked at Sarah, who was reading more text with tears starting to form in her eyes. The only catch, I said, is that I'm lucky enough to be loved by someone incredible. And instead of being happy for me, instead of celebrating your son's wedding, you burned my suit and you're threatening my wife. We're trying to save you. I hung up. Sarah was crying now, quietly, reading message after message from my family. They're saying I trapped you, she whispered. They're saying I'm using you to get some kind of. I don't even understand what they think I want from you. Neither did I. Sarah's family had more money than they could spend in 10 lifetimes. What could she possibly need from me? What could any of them need from a guy who'd been managing a small marketing firm until this morning? We should call the police, Sarah said. This is harassment. The texts, the burned suit. No. The word came out sharper than I meant. Not yet. Let me try to talk to them first. Let me figure out what this is really about. But I was lying. I knew what this was about, and it wasn't about protecting me from a gold digger. It was about shame. My parents were ashamed that their son had married so far above his station. Ashamed that they'd been excluded from the wealth and prestige that came with being related to the Smiths. Ashamed that they hadn't been important enough to be told about Sarah's family background. And rather than admit that shame, rather than swallow their pride and apologize for missing my wedding, they were attacking. They were trying to convince me that my marriage was fake, my wife was manipulative, my happiness was an illusion. They were trying to destroy my marriage to protect their own egos. The realization hit me like cold water. My parents, the people who'd taught me about integrity and loyalty and putting family first, were willing to sacrifice my happiness to preserve their pride. Sarah's phone buzzed again. She looked at it and went pale. What? I asked. It's a photo, she said. Of our house. They sent a photo of our house. I took the phone. It was indeed a picture of our little starter home, taken from the street. The message underneath read, "We know where you live. We know you can't afford this on your salary. How much of Daddy's money paid for your little love nest?" That's it, I said, grabbing my phone. I'm calling them. But before I could dial, my phone rang. Unknown number. David? The voice was unfamiliar, older, with a slight accent I couldn't place. Who is this? My name is Marcus Webb. I'm a private investigator, and I've been hired to look into your marriage. My blood went cold. Hired by who? I'm not at liberty to say. But I think you and I should meet. There are some things about your wife's family that you need to know. I'm not interested. Your parents are in Paris, correct? Staying at the Hotel Plaza Athénée? How could he possibly know that? Mr. Chen, I understand this is a difficult time. But if you want to protect your marriage, and your wife, you need to hear what I have to say. The line went dead. I stared at my phone, trying to process what had just happened. A private investigator. Hired to look into my marriage. Someone who knew where my parents were staying, who had access to information that should have been private. David? Sarah's voice was barely a whisper. What's happening to us? I didn't know. But I was starting to understand that this wasn't just about my parents' pride or their shame about money. This was something bigger. Something darker. Something that was just getting started. I met Marcus Webb at 7 a.m. in a diner 20 miles outside the city. He'd chosen the location, somewhere public but private, he'd said. Somewhere we could talk without being observed. He was younger than his voice had suggested, maybe 45, with a kind of neat appearance that screamed ex-law enforcement. He ordered black coffee and waited for me to sit down before he spoke. Your parents hired me 3 months ago, he said without preamble. They wanted me to investigate Sarah Smith and her family. 3 months ago? My coffee cup rattled against the saucer. But they didn't even know. Oh, they knew. Webb opened a manila folder and slid a photograph across the table. It was Sarah and me at a restaurant, taken with a telephoto lens. They've known about Sarah's identity since your second date. The world tilted sideways. That's impossible. They hired me to follow you after you started acting secretive about your girlfriend. They wanted to know who she was, where she came from, what her family was like. Webb flipped to another photo. Sarah leaving her parents' house, getting into a car I recognized as her father's Bentley. Took me about 6 hours to figure out you were dating Sarah Smith. I stared at the photos, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. If they knew Sarah was rich 3 months ago, why didn't they say anything? Why act surprised about the wedding photos? Webb leaned back in his booth. Because they weren't surprised about the money, Mr. Chen. They were surprised about the photos themselves. I don't understand. He slid another document across the table. It looked like a financial report, pages and pages of numbers and account information. Your parents paid me to investigate the Smith family's business dealings. They wanted to know if there was anything irregular about how the Smiths made their money. And? Clean as a whistle. Robert Smith inherited a small real estate company from his father and built it into an empire through smart investments and harder work than most people can imagine. Catherine's art galleries are legitimate, profitable, and well respected. They pay their taxes, donate to charity, treat their employees well. Webb tapped the report. They're good people, Mr. Chen. Better than most people with that kind of money. So why are you telling me this? Webb's expression darkened. Because your parents weren't satisfied with that answer. When I told them the Smiths were legitimate, they asked me to dig deeper. Look for connections to organized crime, tax evasion, anything that might explain why such a successful family would welcome their son so readily into the fold. And? I found nothing because there was nothing to find. But that's when things got strange. Webb finished his coffee and signaled the waitress for a refill. Your parents became obsessed. They started calling me daily, demanding updates, asking me to investigate Sarah personally. They wanted to know about her previous relationships, her spending habits, her social media activity going back years. I felt sick. You investigated my wife? Ex-girlfriend at the time. And yes, I did. It was a job. Webb looked uncomfortable. But what I found was a woman who'd had 3 serious relationships before you, all with men who made considerably less money than she did. A woman who'd never once used her family's wealth or influence to get ahead professionally. A woman who drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic and lived in a studio apartment until she moved in with you. Sarah's not a gold digger, I said. It felt important to say it out loud. No, she's not. In fact, all the evidence suggests that she goes out of her way to avoid dating men who might be interested in her money. Webb leaned forward. Which is why your parents' next request was so concerning. What did they want? They wanted me to investigate you. The diner suddenly felt too small, too hot, too loud. What do you mean, investigate me? They wanted to know if you'd been lying to them about your relationship with Sarah. If you'd known about her family's money from the beginning and hidden it from them. If you were involved in some kind of scheme. Scheme to do what? That's what I couldn't figure out. Webb spread more documents on the table. Bank statements, credit reports, employment records. All mine. So I looked into your finances, your background, your social media activity. And you know what I found? What? A man who had no idea his girlfriend was rich until she told him. A man who continued to split dinner bills and pay his own rent and buy her birthday gifts from his own savings even after he found out about her family's wealth. Webb gathered up the papers. A man who, by all evidence, fell in love with a woman who happened to be rich, not with a rich woman who happened to be available. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by anger. So you told my parents all this? I did. That's when they fired me. Fired you? Webb nodded. They said if I couldn't find evidence that something was wrong with your relationship, then I wasn't looking hard enough. They accused me of being bought off by the Smith family. That's insane. Yes, it is. And that's when I realized this wasn't about protecting you, Mr. Chen. This was about something else entirely. He pulled out one final document. It was a contract, signed by my father, with a private investigation firm I didn't recognize. Your parents hired a different investigator after they fired me. Someone less ethical. Someone willing to find evidence even if he has to manufacture it. I stared at the contract. What kind of evidence? The kind that could destroy your marriage. The kind that could convince Sarah's family that you're not who you appear to be. Webb's voice was grim. The kind that could get you cut out of the Smith family fortune entirely. But why would they want that? Webb looked at me like I was missing something obvious. Mr. Chen, what happens if your marriage falls apart? What happens if the Smiths decide you're not worthy of their daughter? I don't know. Sarah and I would figure it out. Would you? Webb slid the contract back into his folder. Or would you come running home to your parents, heartbroken and humiliated, ready to let them take care of you again? The truth hit me like a physical blow. My parents didn't want to protect me from Sarah. They wanted Sarah to reject me. They wanted my marriage to fail so I'd come back to them, dependent and grateful and properly ashamed of ever trying to rise above my station. They wanted me broken. I drove home in a daze, Webb's words echoing in my head. My parents had spent months, plotting against my happiness. They'd hired investigators, gathered intelligence, burned my wedding suit, and were now paying someone to manufacture evidence that could destroy my marriage. All because they couldn't stand the thought of their son being happy without them. Sarah was waiting for me when I got home, sitting at our kitchen table with her laptop open and her phone silent beside her. The messages stopped, she said when she saw me. Around 6 this morning, they just stopped. I sat down across from her. They're planning something bigger. I told her everything. About Webb, about the investigation, about my parents' obsession with proving that our marriage was fake. About the unethical investigator they'd hired to find or create evidence against me. Sarah listened in silence, her face growing paler with each detail. They're going to try to convince your family that I'm some kind of con artist, I finished. They're going to manufacture evidence that I knew about your money from the beginning, that I manipulated you into falling in love with me. But that's not true. Truth doesn't matter if the lie is convincing enough. Sarah closed her laptop and looked at me directly. David, there's something I need to tell you. My stomach dropped. What? My father's been getting calls. From people claiming to have information about you. She reached for my hand. He didn't tell me about it until this morning because he didn't want to ruin our wedding day. But someone's been trying to sell him a story about how you've been planning this relationship from the beginning. Planning what relationship? A marriage to gain access to our family's money and business connections. Sarah's voice was steady, but I could see the fear in her eyes. They have photos, David. Photos of you outside my father's office building from before we ever met. That's impossible. I stopped. Because suddenly, horribly, I remembered. 2.5 years ago, I'd applied for a job with a marketing firm that had an office in Robert Smith's building. I'd gone for 3 interviews, walked around the building's lobby waiting for appointments, probably been caught on security cameras dozens of times. I'd never gotten the job. But I'd been there, documented and timestamped, weeks before Sarah and I met at that bookstore. They're going to say I researched you, I said slowly. They're going to say I found out you worked near that building and engineered our meeting. Did you? The question hit like a slap. Of course not. I had no idea you even existed until the day in the bookstore. I know that. Sarah squeezed my hand. But the photos are convincing, David. If someone wanted to make a case that you'd been stalking my family, they'd have enough evidence to make it look plausible. My phone rang. Mom. I almost didn't answer. But something in Sarah's expression made me pick up. David, sweetheart. My mother's voice was sugar sweet, the tone she used when she was about to ask for a favor. How are you enjoying your honeymoon? We haven't left yet. Oh? Having second thoughts? The question was loaded, dangerous. About what? Well, marriage is such a big step. And you've been under so much stress lately, planning the wedding, meeting Sarah's family, trying to fit into their world. A pause. It would be natural if you were having some doubts. I'm not having doubts, Mom. Are you sure? Because we've learned some very interesting things about Sarah's family. About their business practices. About the kinds of people they associate with. My blood went cold. What kinds of people? The kind who might see a sweet, naive boy like you as an opportunity. The kind who might encourage their daughter to seduce someone who could be useful to them later. You're insane. Am I? Then why did Sarah's father offer you a partnership in his company before you'd even been married 24 hours? Why would a billionaire bring an unknown marketing manager into his inner circle unless he had ulterior motives? Because he's a good man who loves his daughter, I wanted to say. Because he saw how happy Sarah was with me and decided to welcome me into his family. But doubt crept in despite myself. It had seemed almost too good to be true, Robert's immediate acceptance of me. His willingness to bring me into the business, to treat me like a son instead of an outsider. Was it possible that I was missing something? David, are you there? I'm here. Good. Because we need you to come home. We have information that you need to see. Information that will change everything. What information? Come home, sweetheart. Let us show you the truth about the woman you think you married. She hung up. I stared at my phone, my mind racing. My parents had something, documents, photos, recordings, something they thought would destroy my faith in Sarah. Something they'd either found or fabricated. What did she say? Sarah asked. I told her. Watched her face crumble as she realized what was happening. They're going to show you fake evidence, she said. They're going to try to convince you that I'm not who you think I am. I know who you are. Do you? Sarah's voice was small, scared. Because if they've manufactured something convincing enough, if they've built a case that looks real. She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Doubt was a poison. Once it entered a relationship, it could destroy everything, even if the original suspicion was completely false. And my parents knew that. I went to my parents' house that afternoon, leaving Sarah at home with promises to call every hour. They were waiting for me in the living room, sitting on the same couch where they'd read me bedtime stories and help me with homework and celebrated every small achievement of my childhood. Now they looked like strangers. David, sit down. My father gestured to the chair across from them. He looked older than when I'd last seen him, more tired, but his eyes were sharp with purpose. On the coffee table between us were 3 manila folders, thick with documents and photographs. We know this is hard, my mother began. We know you love Sarah, or you think you do. But we're your parents, and it's our job to protect you, even when you don't want to be protected. Protect me from what? My father opened the first folder. From being used. The first document was a financial analysis of the Smith family's business holdings. Legitimate information, but presented in a way that made their wealth look suspicious, their success improbable. Look at this, my father said, pointing to a highlighted section. Robert Smith's company has grown by 400% in the past 5 years. That kind of expansion doesn't happen naturally. It doesn't happen without help, my mother added. Without connections. What kind of connections? They exchanged a look. The kind that require fresh blood, David. Young, ambitious people who can be trusted. People who can be influenced. The second folder contained photographs. Me leaving job interviews 2.5 years ago, walking through Robert Smith's office building, sitting in coffee shops near Sarah's work. You were being watched, my mother said softly. Before you ever met her, you were being investigated. By who? By them. My father opened the third folder. They identified you as a potential target months before you met Sarah. They researched your background, your financial situation, your psychological profile. The documents looked official. Clinical. They purported to show that the Smith family had commissioned a study of eligible bachelors in their daughter's age range, looking for men who could be manipulated into marriage. My name was highlighted throughout the reports. This is fake, I said. But my voice sounded uncertain, even to me. Is it? My mother leaned forward. Then explain this. She showed me a photo of Sarah at the bookstore where we'd met, taken the day before our encounter. She was there, in the philosophy section, but she wasn't reading. She was watching the door, checking her phone, clearly waiting for something. Or someone. She knew you'd be there, my father said. She knew about your book buying habits, your schedule, your interests. Your meeting wasn't an accident, David. It was an ambush. I stared at the photo, my mind reeling. Sarah had been there the day before. Had she been scouting the location? Preparing for our accidental meeting? Why? I asked. Why would they go to so much trouble? Because they needed someone like you, my mother said. Someone smart enough to be useful but naive enough to be controlled. Someone who would be grateful for their acceptance, who wouldn't ask too many questions about their business practices. Someone expendable, my father added grimly. They showed me more documents. Financial records suggesting that Sarah had been paid to date me. Communication logs indicating that she reported regularly to her father about our relationship. Psychological evaluations that painted me as an ideal mark, ambitious but insecure, intelligent but gullible. It was all very convincing. It was also all fake. But in that moment, sitting in my childhood living room while my parents methodically destroyed my faith in the woman I loved, I couldn't tell the difference between truth and fabrication. I need to think, I said finally. Of course you do, my mother said, reaching for my hand. This is a lot to process. But David, you have to understand, we're not doing this to hurt you. We're doing this because we love you. We just want our son back, my father added. I left their house with my head spinning and my heart breaking. Everything they'd shown me had felt real, looked legitimate, sounded plausible. And maybe that was the point. Maybe the truth didn't matter as much as the feeling of doubt, the poison of suspicion, the slow erosion of trust that came with seeing evidence, even fake evidence, that the person you loved might not be who they claimed to be. By the time I got home, I was ready to believe that my parents might be right. That Sarah might have been playing a long game from the beginning. That my marriage might be the biggest lie ever told. Sarah was making dinner when I walked in, humming softly to herself as she stirred something on the stove. She looked up when she heard me, smiled that brilliant smile that had made me fall in love with her 2 years ago. How did it go? I sat down at the kitchen table and spread out copies of the documents my parents had shown me. Watched Sarah's face change as she realized what she was looking at. They had photos, I said. Of you at the bookstore. The day before we met. Sarah went very still. Photos of me at the bookstore? You were there, Sarah. The day before we met, you were there. In the philosophy section. Waiting. She turned off the burner and sat down across from me. David, what are you asking me? I'm asking if you knew I would be there. I'm asking if our meeting was an accident or if it was planned. Sarah looked at the photos for a long time, her face unreadable. I was there the day before, she said finally. You're right about that. My heart sank. Sarah, but not for the reason you think. She met my eyes directly. I was there because I'd been thinking about buying a book for my father's birthday. A philosophy book. I went to browse the selection, decided I needed more time to think about it, and left. But in the photo, I was checking my phone because my mother had texted me about dinner plans. I was watching the door because I'd just broken up with someone and I was paranoid about running into him. She reached across the table and took my hands. David, do you really think I'm capable of orchestrating some elaborate scheme to trick you into marriage? Do you think I'm that good of an actress? I looked at her, really looked at her. At the woman who cried during sad movies, who couldn't lie to save her life, who'd been genuinely surprised when I proposed even though we'd been talking about marriage for months. No, I said. But the documents are fake, David. All of them. Sarah's voice was steady, certain. Your parents hired someone to create convincing lies, and it worked. You're doubting me because that's exactly what they wanted. She was right. Deep down, I knew she was right. But the seed of doubt had been planted, and it was growing. How do I know for sure? I asked. Sarah smiled sadly. You don't. That's the whole point. Once someone plants doubt in your mind about the person you love, there's no amount of evidence that can completely eliminate it. Your parents know that. She stood up and walked to our kitchen junk drawer, pulled out a small notebook. But I can show you something they couldn't fake. She opened the notebook and handed it to me. It was her handwriting, dated 3 years ago, 6 months before we'd even met. I met someone today, the entry began. A guy at the coffee shop who made me laugh for the first time in weeks. He didn't ask for my number, didn't even ask my name. Just made me remember that there are still good people in the world. I hope I run into him again. I looked up at her. This is about me? The coffee shop near the university. You were reading a book about marketing psychology, and you made a joke about how the barista was probably trained to upsell us on pastries. I laughed so hard I snorted coffee. Sarah sat back down. I went to that bookstore the next day hoping I might see you there. And the day after that. And the day after that. The notebook contained dozens of entries about me. About how she'd hoped to run into me again, how she'd changed her routine trying to find me, how she'd finally given up and decided to focus on meeting new people instead. How she'd gone to the bookstore that day not to ambush me, but to try something new. To be open to possibilities. You were stalking me, I said, but I was smiling now. I was hoping, she corrected. There's a difference. I flipped through more pages, reading about her life before me. Her loneliness, her previous relationships, her dreams of finding someone who would love her for herself rather than her family's money. This could be fake too, I said, but my heart wasn't in it anymore. It could be, Sarah agreed. But David, you know me. You've known me for 2 years. You've seen me at my worst, my most vulnerable, my most honest moments. Do you really think I've been acting this entire time? I thought about Sarah crying during a commercial about shelter dogs. Sarah staying up all night to take care of me when I had food poisoning. Sarah defending me to her college friends who'd made snobby comments about my job. Sarah telling me she loved me for the first time, nervous and genuine and completely unpracticed. No, I said. I don't think you've been acting. Then trust that feeling. Trust what you know about me instead of what your parents want you to believe. I closed the notebook and reached for her hands. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I doubted you, even for a minute. You don't need to apologize for being human, David. You need to decide what you're going to do about your parents. That was the question, wasn't it? My parents had hired investigators, manufactured evidence, and burned my wedding suit. They'd harassed my wife and threatened my marriage. They'd spent months plotting to destroy my happiness. What was I supposed to do with that knowledge? I don't know, I said honestly. Well, you'd better figure it out soon, Sarah said, checking her phone. Because they just sent me another message. She showed me the screen. Ask your husband about the job offer. Ask him if he's told you the truth about why he really married you. What job offer? Sarah asked. I stared at the text message, my mind racing. I don't know what they're talking about. But even as I said it, a memory surfaced. Robert Smith, 2 weeks ago, pulling me aside during a family dinner. David, I've been thinking, he'd said. After the wedding, after you and Sarah get back from your honeymoon, I'd like to talk to you about a position in the company. Something that would use your marketing background but give you exposure to the broader business. I'd been flattered, excited, grateful. A chance to work with my future father-in-law, to learn from one of the most successful businessmen in the state. But I hadn't told Sarah about it yet. I'd wanted to wait until after the wedding, until we were settled, until I knew more details about what Robert had in mind. Your father offered me a job, I said slowly. 2 weeks ago. I was going to tell you after the honeymoon. Sarah frowned. What kind of job? I don't know exactly. Something in marketing, but with broader business exposure. I felt defensive suddenly, though I wasn't sure why. He said he wanted to talk about it after we got back, and you didn't think to mention this? I was going to. I just wanted to wait until. My phone rang. Robert Smith. I answered with shaking hands. Hello, Robert. David, I'm sorry to bother you during what should be your honeymoon preparation, but I've received some very disturbing information. Robert's voice was tight, controlled. Information that suggests you may not have been entirely honest with us about your motivations for marrying Sarah. What information? I'd rather discuss this in person. Can you and Sarah come to the house? Tonight? I looked at Sarah, who was watching me with growing alarm. We'll be there, I said. The Smith mansion felt different that night. Colder. Less welcoming. Catherine met us at the door with a strained smile, and Robert was waiting in his study with documents spread across his desk. The same documents my parents had shown me that afternoon. David, Robert began without preamble, how long have you known about Sarah's family background? Since our 4th date, I said honestly. She told me you were in real estate. And when did you learn the extent of our wealth? I thought back. Gradually. Over months. It wasn't like she sat me down and gave me a financial breakdown. Robert picked up a photograph, one of me outside his office building 2.5 years ago. Then how do you explain this? I interviewed for a job with a marketing firm in your building. I didn't get it. I was getting tired of explaining this. I had no idea you existed at that point. What about this? He showed me another photo, this one of Sarah at the bookstore. Our investigator says this proves your meeting was orchestrated. Your investigator? Sarah stepped forward, her voice sharp. Dad, what investigator? Robert looked uncomfortable. After I started receiving calls about David's background, I hired someone to verify the information independently. You hired someone to investigate my husband? I hired someone to protect this family, Robert said firmly. And I'm glad I did, because the evidence suggests that David has been dishonest about his intentions from the beginning. What evidence? I demanded. Show me something real, something that isn't circumstantial or manipulated. Robert opened another folder. This one contained financial records, real ones, from legitimate sources. Bank statements, credit reports, employment history. Your financial situation improved dramatically after you started dating Sarah, he said, pointing to highlighted sections. Your credit score went up, you moved to a better apartment, you started shopping at more expensive stores. Because I got a promotion at work. I was shouting now, frustrated and angry. Because I was motivated to improve my life, because I was in love and wanted to be worthy of the woman I'd fallen for. Or because you knew you were going to marry into wealth and started spending accordingly. Sarah slammed her hand on the desk. Dad, stop. Just stop. Sarah, you don't understand. I understand that you're being manipulated by the same people who burned David's wedding suit and sent me threatening text messages, Sarah said. I understand that David's parents have spent months trying to destroy our marriage, and now they've managed to turn you into their weapon. Robert's face went white. What are you talking about? I told him everything. About the private investigator my parents had hired, about the harassment, about the fake documents and manufactured evidence. About their plan to turn Sarah's family against me. They're using you, I finished. They found out you'd hired an investigator and fed him the same lies they've been spreading. They're counting on you to destroy my marriage for them. Robert looked at the documents on his desk with new eyes. These came from someone claiming to represent a concerned party who'd discovered information about your character. A concerned party named Chen? Sarah asked. Robert's silence was answer enough. Catherine, who'd been quiet throughout the confrontation, finally spoke. Robert, call your investigator. Ask him where he got this information. Robert made the call, put it on speakerphone. The investigator's voice was defensive, evasive. I received the documents from a reliable source, he said. Someone with intimate knowledge of Mr. Chen's character and motivations. What's the source's name? Robert demanded. I'm not at liberty. The source's name. A pause. Margaret and Thomas Chen. The subject's parents. Robert hung up and looked at me with new understanding. Your parents fed my investigator information about you? Information they manufactured, Sarah said. Information designed to make you doubt David's motives and kick him out of the family. But why would they? Robert stopped, understanding dawning on his face. They want you back. They want me broken, I corrected. They want me to come crawling home after my rich wife's family rejects me. They want me dependent on them again, grateful for their love, properly ashamed of ever trying to rise above my station. Catherine shook her head. That's monstrous. That's family, I said bitterly. Robert gathered up the documents and dropped them in his trash can. David, I owe you an apology. I should have verified the source of this information before acting on it. You were protecting your family, I said. I understand that. No, you don't understand. Robert walked around his desk and put his hand on my shoulder. You are my family. As of yesterday, you're my son. And I failed to protect you from people who wanted to hurt you. The relief was overwhelming. For a moment, I thought I might cry. What do we do now? Sarah asked. Now, Robert said, his voice taking on the steel edge that had built a business empire, we deal with your parents. Robert Smith didn't get rich by letting people manipulate him. Once he understood what my parents had done, he transformed from concerned father-in-law to ruthless businessman in the span of a heartbeat. They hired a private investigator to build a case against you, he said, pacing his study like a general planning a campaign. They manufactured evidence, committed harassment, and attempted to destroy your marriage through fraud and intimidation. Legally, what does that mean? I asked. Legally, it means they've committed several crimes, Catherine said. She'd been quiet during Robert's explanation, but now her voice carried the authority of someone who'd navigated high-stakes business deals for decades. Harassment, stalking, fraud, possibly extortion. But they're my parents. They're criminals, Sarah said flatly. They're criminals who happen to share your DNA. Robert pulled out his phone. David, I'm going to make some calls. People I know in law enforcement, in the legal community. Your parents need to understand that their actions have consequences. Wait. I held up my hand. Before we do anything that can't be undone, let me try talking to them one more time. David, please. Let me try to understand why they did this. Let me give them a chance to explain themselves before we destroy their lives. Robert and Sarah exchanged a look. Fine, Robert said finally. But you're not going alone, and you're not going unarmed. What do you mean? Robert opened his laptop and began typing. I mean you're going to have backup, legal protection, and evidence of your own. If your parents want to play games, we'll show them how the game is really played. An hour later, I had a lawyer, a private security consultant, and a digital forensics expert on speed dial. More importantly, I had a plan. We were going to give my parents exactly what they wanted, a face-to-face confrontation. And then we were going to end this. I called my parents at 10 p.m., knowing they'd still be awake, probably planning their next move. David. My mother's voice was bright, fake cheerful. How did your conversation with the Smiths go? They kicked me out, I lied. You were right about everything. Sarah's family showed me the door the moment they realized I wasn't useful to them anymore. I heard my mother take a sharp breath, could practically feel her satisfaction through the phone. Oh, sweetheart, I'm so sorry. But we tried to warn you. I need to see you, I said, putting just the right amount of desperation in my voice. Tonight. I need to come home. Of course, come home. We'll take care of everything. I'm bringing Sarah, I added. She's pretty upset. She wants to apologize to you for all the things she said. A pause. My parents hadn't expected Sarah to want to apologize for anything. That's wonderful, David. We'll be waiting. I hung up and looked at Sarah, who was sitting beside me in the back of Robert's car. Our security consultant was driving, our lawyer was on standby, and our digital forensics expert was monitoring my parents' communications in real time. Are you sure about this? Sarah asked. No, I said honestly. But I need to hear them admit what they did. I need to understand why they thought destroying my happiness was an acceptable price for having me back under their control. We pulled up outside my childhood home at 11:15 p.m. The lights were on, and I could see my parents waiting by the window. They'd prepared quite a welcome for their defeated son. My parents were practically vibrating with excitement when they opened the door. They hugged me, offered Sarah sympathetic smiles, and ushered us into the living room like we were honored guests instead of victims of their months-long campaign of psychological warfare. David, we're so sorry you had to go through this, my mother said, settling onto the couch with the satisfied expression of someone whose worst predictions had come true. But now you can see what kind of people they really are. Tell me again what you found, I said. About Sarah, about her family. I want to hear it all. My father pulled out those same manila folders, the same fake documents, the same manufactured evidence. But this time, he was eager to share details, to explain exactly how Sarah and her family had manipulated me. The bookstore meeting was planned from the beginning, he said, showing me the photos again. Sarah was instructed to target you specifically. Instructed by who? By her father, obviously. He needed someone like you for his business, young, ambitious, easy to control. But why me specifically? My parents exchanged a look. Because you fit their profile, my mother said. Lower middle class background, financial insecurity, family that wouldn't ask too many questions about sudden wealth. Family that wouldn't ask questions? David, my father said patiently, as if explaining something to a child, people like the Smiths don't want in-laws who understand their business. They want people who will be grateful for whatever scraps they throw our way. And there it was. The truth, finally. This wasn't about protecting me from Sarah. This wasn't about exposing some elaborate scheme to trap me. This was about my parents' shame at being judged lesser than by the Smith family. This was about their fear that they'd be relegated to the kids' table at family gatherings, that they'd be patronized and pitied by people with more money and education and social standing. They'd tried to destroy my marriage because they couldn't stand the thought of being the poor relatives. What about the job offer? I asked. Robert offered me a position in his company. Was that part of the scheme too? Of course it was, my mother said. They needed you invested in the family business so you couldn't leave even if you discovered the truth about Sarah. And what truth is that? That she doesn't love you, my father said simply. That this whole relationship has been a business arrangement designed to benefit her family. I looked at Sarah, who was sitting quietly beside me, letting my parents reveal exactly how deep their delusion went. Sarah, I said, is there anything you want to say to my parents? She smiled sweetly. Actually, yes. Sarah reached into her purse and pulled out a small recording device. I want to say thank you, she said, for confessing to fraud, harassment, stalking, and conspiracy on tape. My parents' faces went white. That's right, I said, standing up. We recorded everything. Your admission that you hired investigators to manufacture evidence against me. Your confession that you sent threatening messages to my wife. Your detailed explanation of how you've spent months trying to destroy my marriage. David, we can explain. You just did explain, Sarah said. Quite thoroughly. I pulled out my phone and called Robert. Dad? Yeah, we got it all. Every word. My parents looked between us in growing horror. You're our son, my mother whispered. You can't do this to us. You're right, I said. I can't do this to you. But you did it to yourselves. The legal proceedings took 4 months. My parents were charged with harassment, stalking, fraud, and conspiracy. They pleaded guilty to lesser charges in exchange for restraining orders and mandatory counseling. I never spoke to them again. Sarah and I did go to Tuscany for our honeymoon, eventually. We spent 2 weeks in a villa that Robert had insisted on paying for, drinking wine and eating pasta and slowly healing from the damage my parents had tried to inflict on our marriage. I started working for Robert's company in January. Not because I was being controlled or manipulated, but because I was good at it and I loved the challenge and Robert treated me like the son he'd never had. Sarah and I bought a bigger house in March. We're thinking about kids, about the kind of family we want to build together. Sometimes I wonder if my parents realize what they lost when they chose their pride over their son's happiness. I wonder if they understand that their need to control me cost them everything, their relationship with me, their chance to be grandparents, their place in my life. But mostly, I try not to think about them at all. Because here's what I learned, family isn't about blood or obligation or control. Family is about love, support, and wanting the best for each other, even when that means letting go. Sarah's parents understood that from the beginning. They welcomed me not because they needed something from me, but because they loved their daughter and wanted her to be happy. My parents never learned that lesson. And by the time they realized what they'd lost, it was too late to get it back. I still have the burned wedding suit. I keep it in a box in our closet, not as a reminder of what my parents did, but as proof of what I survived. Love won. But sometimes, it has to fight for the victory. And sometimes, the people you have to fight are the ones who claim to love you first. The recording device sits in our safe deposit box now, along with all the evidence of my parents' campaign against our marriage. I hope we never need it again. But if anyone ever tries to tell you that family can't be your worst enemy, if anyone ever tries to convince you that blood is thicker than water, I have 4 months of documentation that proves otherwise. Trust is earned. Love is chosen. And family, real family, is the people who want you to be happy, even when your happiness doesn't include them. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is letting them go. My parents never learned that lesson. But Sarah's parents did. And that's made all the difference.